The one thing you can't change is the market. You will not change it. It has certain demand patterns. It has certain dynamics that exist. Certain things are changing in that market that allow you an opportunity to build a product that they want. Be it consumer, be it, I focus more on enterprise software, so maybe this is a little bit tainted by that. But there has to be something, some dislocation or some change that is causing a small initially, the innovators, bigger eventually, early adopters, and even bigger later, early majority, right? The chasm, or crossing the chasm, that it's becoming a P0 problem, a right now problem I need to solve. Very few markets actually unlock demand like that continuously in big chunks of the market in compressed timeframes. That's venture, the compressed time frame. You could be right about a business from point A to point B, and that's you have to think much longer term. We're in these businesses for 10 plus years. You got to really think long term about them. And you could be right, but if you're wrong about the slope, it's not a venture business.
Hey everyone, welcome to LinkedIn Presents Redefining Work podcast. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and today I'm really excited to be joined by JP Sanday. JP is a partner at Menlo Ventures. He is somebody who I have crossed paths with several times at HR conferences and events. He has a keen eye on the world of work and the space that we occupy through the lens of venture, and I'm really excited to explore that with him in this chat. So JP, man, it's good to have you on the show. What do you want the audience to know about you? I will leave the additional introduction to you.
I appreciate it, Lars, and good to be with you. So I started my career 18 years ago. I stumbled into private equity. I'll call it stumbled because I grew up in Argentina, so I didn't grow up in the US. Back then in 2006, 2005, it's not like people had venture capital or private equity on the mind the way they do today. And certainly not a kid from Argentina who went to college here. It wasn't something we talked about in college even a lot. And so I kind of stumbled into it. It was just opportunistic, and that kind of opened the world to me into the other side of the equation, because a lot of people are going into accounting or banking or finance. But that really opened it up. And it's sort of, once you see that side of the world, you never go back. And so my experience is an investor, then I was an operator for a long time, and then I went back to investing more later stage, and then decided all my operating background was venture-backed startups. And so that's where I got appreciation for how important people are to the business and how you orchestrate it and align people in companies. And I think that kind of little sandwich of an experience is what I bring to bear, whether it's in new investments or as a board members of different companies. And so then 5 years ago, I came to Menlo Ventures to do this at much more early stages.
Yeah. Well, you've worked across stages, obviously, throughout your career, both as an operator, working in PE, working in venture. What is it about early stage that kind of draws you to this sector, this stage of growth? What about that appeals to you?
I'll tell you one thing. It is really messy. It's very risky. It's sloppy. But it is by far the more exciting part. Building is very different than maintaining, is the way I like to think about it. And not that in private equity, you're not doing really important things and it's really hard. It seems easy from the outside. It is very difficult, no matter what you do, because there's always people to manage. There's always things to change in a business. And in the private equity I was in a firm called Summit Partners both times. And I love them. And it was more growth oriented than most private equity firms, but still my instincts, a little bit more of my operating career was in this stage of company, right? At Menlo, we invest everywhere in the early stages, I'll call it, whether it's pre-product market fit or post-product market fit, and kind of as you're starting to scale your company. And this is where I really focus my time, given that I've come from the later stages. And I'll tell you that, again, it's risky, it's messy, but it is a lot more fun to be building that and to have the reference point of a well-run, professionalized organization or organizations that I was on the board of when I was in private equity come back to these venture businesses. And not that they need to be run the same way, but there's a lot of great discipline that can be brought to these companies as they scale up, because it is the hardest transition to make, is the two pizza team or a couple two pizza teams to a real organization, right? Founders have to evolve. I always say during the stage I'm at, Series B, Series C, the letters really don't mean much anymore, but sort of post product market fit.
Yeah.
As you're scaling up, that's when a founder also needs to go from founder to CEO in a big way. And that transition happens within those folks, him or her, and it has to happen all throughout the organization. So there's a lot of transformation that happens in that time. And most important thing is to say, don't look at what your peers are doing, kind of look at models of success in public companies that we've backed before, or even other companies, again, very professional, very well-run companies like in private equity or growth equity. Those are really important reference points.
Yeah. Well, when you're betting early as you are, a big part of that bet is on the founder. It's the viability of the product and the viability of the market potential and the product market fit, but it's the person steering that ship ultimately that you're placing a bet on, right? Because it's rare they're going to have like a one of one company in an industry that there's no other peers and comparison points, right? Especially kind of now you have multiple companies cropping up in different sectors. So
every other day, lift up a rock and out runs another one. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the world we're in right now. And so you're betting on an individual. You're betting on somebody that, as you mentioned, kind of can make that bridge going from a founder to a CEO. And not all of them can. How do you gauge that? Like when you think back to some of the bets you've made or any rubrics that you use to kind of gauge, like, this is somebody who has it, she or him is able to, kind of see the big picture, build the right team, rally the right team, have the vision, and scale with the business. Walk me through like your thought process on how you evaluate that kind of talent.
It's hard. I mean, that is one of the hardest things to do, is because these are not, just like companies, these founders are not finished products.
Yeah.
Very rarely you'll get second time, third time founders. But a lot of times you have very young founders that are, that's the new world of ventures. A lot of very young founders that are very high potential, but high potential. They're not all there yet. Even if they're executing incredibly well, they're going to have to find another gear at every stage, right? Just like the company, we talked about the transformation, founder, CEO, and they're going to have to find another gear. So it's a lot more about projection and understanding sort of, as one of my partners, Joff, he used to run the product teams. He was CPO at Atlassian, Chief Product Officer at Atlassian. He was a VP of product at LinkedIn early on. So he has this really interesting meld of how to assess humans, because he put it into a product. And then, obviously running a big product organization, he thought about this a lot. I will tell you, he talks about people's slopes. So how do you find and judge the slope of a human being? Because that's as important as to their absolute kind of ranking or absolute sort of level at which they operate today. And founders especially, it's all about slope. So you have to look at their past, look at the slope, because he taught me that was another way to read a LinkedIn profile, is look at the slope. And sometimes also you don't see it from a LinkedIn profile. That's why we are so big on spending time with founders very early if we can. In our Series A early fund, our early stage venture fund, those rounds get done so quickly, it's sometimes difficult, but we're pretty good at making sure that we have a long history with founders. Certainly at the fund I work at, Series B, whether we've probably seen the seed, we've almost definitely seen the A. That's exactly right after that happens is when we get engaged to see them evolve, because we need to see that slope firsthand, and vice versa, by the way. They got to choose us eventually too. So they're looking at our slope. They're looking at our understanding of their business. And that should hopefully be in the same slope. But I hire with 4 H's. Horsepower, that's just clock speed, how fast are they at picking things up? Hunger, so how ambitious are they? How big do they think? Hustle, which is different. You can have big ambition and not sort of be ready to sort of do the nitty-gritty things you need to do to make it happen today, even if you have to do it, not delegating, like just jumping in and doing it yourself. And you just know someone who has hustle. That's like the word that comes up. It's like, when you see it. And then the fourth one is humility. So humility is really hard. I'd say that's probably the most significant trait, because to be high slope, you have to want to be in growth mindset. And if you think you're there already and you're awesome, it's just going to happen to you and you're just going to be great, because these founders are really, really smart, usually very capable, very accomplished. If they think they don't need to grow, they will never grow until it's too late. And so the humility piece, It's hard to judge, but you know when someone's not there. But I think humility expresses itself in many different ways. And one of the ways it does is curiosity, because to be curious, you have to inherently believe you don't have all the answers. And there's a humility in that. Even though you might be very confident in your abilities, very confident in what direction you're going, it doesn't mean you're reassessing the North Star of your business or the mission or your strategy, but it means in terms of your ability to align people and craft an organization that is high execution, call it a high octane company. You have to be very humble. And again, humility also is in hiring people that are incredibly capable, that in certain areas are going to know a lot more than you. And so that is also a trait of humility.
How much, I want to key on that hiring piece for a minute. Like, how much does that come into play in terms of trying to gauge, like, can this person attract, sell, close, and develop other, the term like A performers or A players is played out.
True.
I'm not even going to use that, but like
very true though. I already know you're going to say it's very true.
Yeah. So like, how do you gauge that, right? Because that is also like, you again, the team that you put around you, especially at that, probably more at the A stage than the B stage necessarily, but you're at a different level of maturity. You might need to up level some of those key positions that, just can't make that leap from A to B and B to C. So how do you gauge that as an investor? Like, are they going to be able to build the right team around them?
Yeah, we talk a lot about stage appropriate hiring.
Yeah.
And those hires, sometimes it's the case that they evolve with the company, and they do find their next gear in whatever functional role it is. Sometimes we haven't set them up to do that. And sometimes they don't find that next gear, but they're still world class at the time at which they joined, and they might have a unique ability to take a company from 0 to 1, not just founders, but even functional leads. And vice versa. There's a lot of functional leads that are great at scaled companies and not very good at building functions up. So it goes both ways. So there's nothing to say these people aren't capable. It just has to be stage appropriate. And if they have a superpower and they want to extend it, then great, we can give them the shot to do it. And if not, that's fine. The business road always comes first. And so beyond of any one founder, beyond any one co-founder, beyond any one department head or anything like that. So my partner, Jordan, who's our talent partner, he always talks about talent magnets. Like his lens is, can this person be a talent magnet? And the reason it's important is because there is no distance between founder and individual contributor, and founder might be more likely than not individual contributor through the Series A stage. But then that's when you start injecting people in between, and not because it's a bad thing. It's a necessary thing to scale a company, right?
Yeah.
To scale systems, process, and become a high performing organization, not just a high performing single team or 2 pizza team, right? Or a couple of those. And so what's really important is to attract those people. They then will attract the next level of individual contributor or manager to that company. And it used to be all on the founder, and the founder, sure, they can do the last interview and all that, but they're not going to be the ones that convince people to come way sooner than they should, right? These high performing people have a lot of options, and you got to make them do something quote unquote crazy to join your up and coming startup way beforehand, because by the way, you need their skills way before you think you do. And again, that's why talent magnet is so important, because then they attract other talent magnets, and that's how it cascades down in the A player, B player thing. And so we do assess that, and sometimes there's always some evidence of that, even in the Series A, C. There's always an evidence, because that's really shines then.
Yeah.
Because if they can convince someone to go in this, when this is a seed round company or even a Series A company, before they have being legitimized by a large name or someone like Menlo or others, that's unique. And then it's up to us to try to help them after that Series A or even after the Series B to kind of know when. We've seen a lot of patterns of a lot of people be successful and not be successful in certain roles, and heading up certain departments at certain stages of companies. And so sometimes the founder, it's their first or second time they do it, maybe third, but we've seen it individually, tens of times, and as a firm, hundreds of times. And so that's hopefully what we bring to the table.
I think obviously, from the firm's perspective, and just as you mentioned, the volume that you're working across of companies, founders, teams, that ability to pattern match, obviously driven by a lot of data to base those patterns on, is key. And I'm curious to get your perspective. Like, we've been talking a lot about the notion of talent density over the last, 6 months. So again, A players, right? We're playing a bit of buzzword bingo now, but it's part of the vernacular of how we think about and talk about talent especially in startups and venture-backed companies. And I'm curious to get your perspective from a pattern matching standpoint. Have you identified, like, are there signals at an A stage, and perhaps, even expanding on what you just mentioned, right? If they're able to attract that, elite talent at that early stage, that's a great indicator that it's going to be an environment of talent magnets. And if you have an environment of talent magnets, that's really where talent density comes from, because great talent is attracted to that environment. Are there any other, signals that you've kind of seen from a pattern standpoint around environments that tend to become those, like, especially as they mature, continue to become kind of talent magnets and draw the right talent that allows them to have that density?
Oh, if I had a definitive answer, I'd never make a poor investment. I would say two parts. So first, I want to acknowledge the talent density point. This is something I wrote about a while ago, because I was an operator at the beginning, kind of 2011, 12, kind of iPhone was still ramping up and penetrating. There were a lot of mobile companies. This was like the mobile social local thing that happened. And sort of still the continuation of kind of SaaS was relatively new in its form within big enterprises. And I remember that also started the proliferation of venture capital, venture capital firms, assets under management, everything. And what happened is, it's not like we lack talented people in the world. It's just not everybody's made out to be a founder. There's a very unique human being with I think they're crazy, because they could get a really high paying jobs and be much more comfortable doing something else, but they're doing this crazy thing. I always ask founders, like, what made you do this otherwise crazy, illogical thing to start a company? But it's almost like they can't help themselves. It's not because, I had the opportunity, I do it. No, I just can't help myself, but I have to do this. And so again, I'll get to your answer, I promise. But the talent density point is, at that time, I remember I use this exact term because so many people I knew, because they could raise money and because they could have a good idea, they're sharp and they could paint a big vision, and so much money chasing individuals to fund them, everybody got to start their own company. And it's sort of, again, scarcity, mother of all creativity, right? But when there's plentiful capital everywhere, it's happening today, of course, but constraints are good. And it has been unconstrained for too long, in a very long time. And so what happened is, all that talent, whereas it otherwise would have been in one place under one roof to deal with very difficult problems, challenges, opportunities, having to pivot, that's amazing brain trust to have to do that. But when it's dissipated across many different businesses, they may or may not be in the same space, but it's just not in one place. Each one of these doesn't have as much of a right, because top talent doesn't grow on trees. And so when it's dissipated, it's a semi-finite resource. It doesn't grow at the same pace as the companies and the assets under management grew in venture. And so it does get dissipated. People underappreciate that, but it is very real. So what's important for us is, we don't have to make every investment. We just have to make the ones where we see certain things, right? The pattern match on this talent density point. So I remember talking literally about that same term, thinking there isn't a lot of talent density anymore. If you think about it, what's the last mafia that we've had? It's like, people still talk about the PayPal mafia, and people talk about other ones, but they're more like, okay, people leave there, and like a PM leaves here, a PM leaves there, but it's not the executives at a company that all then leave and do amazing things. Just think about all the people in the room at PayPal. That is at VP and above. I'm not talking about the rest. Yeah. It's an incredible amount of brain. By the way, any successful startup needs all of that. And so what's important for us today is to understand the early signs of that, or even if you see it. And the way I do it is, we talk to the founders. Obviously, they have to be like incredible. They have to captivate you. The rules we have is, if the roles were reversed, would you work for them? Right? Would you want to work for this person? The other one, the other way to do it is to say, sure, the executives they hire, you can judge them. Sometimes you may or may not have so much of an opportunity to do that. But even go down to the individual contributors, because if it trickled all the way down, then you sort of know anybody in the middle is also going to be really, really good. Because if those people are enabled, empowered, and really, really excited, and they're high performing people. So we actually back channel all types of employees in the company to really understand how much of that trickles down and do they have that density. It could look dense at the top and then nothing, right? But we want to look under the water and figure that out. And so that's a way to do it. There's no great pattern to match other than if it hits you that this is a really high performing person and very captivating, you then want to say, okay, how far does it go? Right? How far is it? And I remember one of my investments, I traveled out to Stockholm. Sana, it's a relevant investment in this space. I traveled out to Stockholm to see them when we were trying to win this deal. And I remember it was like a Friday night, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., because I had just landed and we were in their office eating pizza and beer. It's like a bunch of their employees were still there. I was like, what are you doing here on Friday? That was data. But then as I talked to everybody, I talked to the customer success person, not even the VP, just a regular customer success manager, other people. It was very evident that this trickled all the way down. And I kind of had the notion of that, but it was very, very evident when you got there. And so, again, I think in venture, it is so important. Talent density is not sufficient for an amazing company, but it is absolutely a requirement. Of all the ones that end up being successful, they always had it, and they had it earlier than you thought. But it doesn't mean just because you have it, it'll work. But it certainly means it's necessary, not sufficient. And so when that example I gave you of me going over there and talking to those people, it is held true in the way they hire because those people will not tolerate, the system will reject the organ if it doesn't fit. And they're very conscious about that. So that goes back to people and how you create your organization, not just high level culture, but in the day to day, what do you tolerate? What do you not tolerate? What behaviors, what defines kind of how you do things as a company. And as soon as you start tolerating a little, one standard deviation away, there's just kind of no limits to it because it spreads faster than you think.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And Asana obviously is a company that we kind of connected on, and I've been, a customer and user of their product and platform, and Joel and the team are outstanding. And I can see to a person, I think I've probably worked with a dozen people in different capacities over there over the last, 3-4 years, all of them outstanding. So kind of hearing, your kind of analogy around like that bar is maintained, I think it's key. And I think, it's easy, especially for earlier stage companies when you're chasing growth, which we could have another conversation as to whether you should be doing that to begin with. But let's just say you are, right? For whatever reason, nobody's talked you out of that yet. It's easy for that bar to shift. Well, we really need this person yesterday, and that changes. And especially at a Series A stage, like your culture, it changes with every hire you make. And so the moment you that becomes a precedent, and something that you've done, you can't really undo that. Or if you do, it's very difficult. I mean, it's kind of similar like the no asshole rule, right? If you have that, that's a killer of your culture, and then you allow asshole behavior of a top performer, you don't have that rule anymore. And not only that, but you've lost trust and credibility because now you say you have something that the employees clearly know you do not. And that trust begins eroding, and that's much worse than firing a high performer. So I want to kind of continue pulling on the Asana analogy for a moment, just in the context of AI. Because I think, we had a chance to riff a little bit before we started recording of just, AI in the world today. And we were catching up on, Google's Notebook LM and just some of the things that we're seeing. And obviously from an investment standpoint, it's a white hot space. We're recording this not long after OpenAI's record setting, and you're seeing just tons of money being poured into that space. From an investor standpoint, like how do you assess and evaluate the AI landscape? Because it feels that obviously there's a hype cycle around it, understandably so, but you're starting to see valuations and investments in ideas, and you're starting to see so many different companies pop up that probably won't be here in 18 months. And so it's easy to kind of become smitten around this hype cycle. How do you avoid that? How do you ensure that the diligence methods that you have and you've used in the past, you can also apply to this sector that's kind of on fire right now?
Great question, Lars. Honestly, we are very conscious of that and think about it a lot. We're very, very large investors and very committed at Anthropic as one of the players. That happens to be the one that we invested in over almost 2 years ago now. and then more than double down recently. And I would say that is one where, we do split the world into two big parts, the infrastructure layer and then the application layer. So the infrastructure layer is now where I spend my time. We have specialists, like that's all they do is think about that. And so that's where Anthropic comes in, and sure, they're popping up into the application layer here or there, but they're very much obviously a foundational model. And I don't think we would have been happy. At the time, it wasn't evident, but I don't think we would be happy if they were the number 5 or 6 player there. And not to say that more people won't be there, but we have to be a relevant player in that part of infrastructure, which is all brand new, like just straight up brand new. It's almost like when cloud came in, all these different things needed to exist, systems, process, everything, all the scaffolding around setting up cloud is very different than when you rack servers. And so those are just net new things that will appear. And if you think cloud is going to be big, if you think AI is going to be big, this infrastructure layer is very important. So for our bets in particular, but it kind of highlights this infrastructure layer. There's a foundation layer, foundation layers, and that layer of it, obviously the chips and NVIDIA and everything going on there. That's kind of, there are some plays there that are interesting. We haven't played, but that is a place, everything even underlying those foundation layer companies. But we start at the foundation layer, then we go up. For us, we have an investment in a vector database company called Pinecone. Then we have things that need to clean your data. That's Clean Lab. We have things that make unstructured data structured. That's a company called Unstructured. Beyond that, it's less about each individual company, but those are very new layer. All these layers didn't exist a lot, call it 3 years ago. They needed to come into fruition. But that layer, and there's more parts of it, and we wrote a lot about it, but I think that is very distinct from the application layer. And those need to happen first a lot of times, because that is the plumbing and scaffolding that gets put out there. And now more and more capable people, sure, there are some, like in the case of Sana and Joel, because of his connection to OpenAI personally, to some of the product teams there, was iterating with this a lot early. But it doesn't mean other people now are able to do it. And because of all this infrastructure laid out, it's easier to do it now, whereas somebody else had to do it themselves or have prior knowledge. And so now this is laid out, that's where the application layer comes in. And so in the infrastructure layer, the philosophy there is winners are declared fairly early because everybody just kind of gravitates to one in each part of it, and we just have to be in the right one, right? Or one or two players. And then in the application layer, that's the trickiest one, because you have to find, like we talk about, the distance between the model and the company's tool. And that distance, if there's not a lot of daylight, that's dangerous. So where do technical teams really shine in that environment? It's not just about nested prompting models or using them or wrapping them. Certainly don't want to be in those businesses, but you do want to have a team that's thinking about how do you scale this to make it more profitable, because these are not cheap models to use. And so you probably have to architect, and we do a lot of these enterprise AI reports where we do one every year, and we're going to publish one very soon. People are using a ton of different models, big companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, other software players. And so that's where the technical expertise really is starting to shine. In these application companies, I almost feel like there's chief architects, that was sort of how you architected your cloud services, Kubernetes containers and things like that. Now you almost have to have a chief AI architect, which is a system within a system within your tool to really make this a scalable product, create daylight in between what you do, and create value add on top of these models. And again, like you always have to keep moving because the foundation models are getting better. But again, like vertical applications, the foundation models are not going to apply to everything in every instance in every way. There's always going to have to be workflows around them. There's always going to have to be specific integrations and how you normalize data from all those places. That creates a lot of, that alone creates distance, because then you can do more. There's like a subset of things you just can't do if you don't do this natively in your app. So I don't want to go into too much detail to bore the audience, but I do feel like those are mechanisms that if we don't understand it from first principles of why this deserves to exist, then you can't really even worry about all the rest of the pieces. And again, they're very hard to tell apart because there's just so many of these in every area. And so we have this idea of a sprint where we identify an area we think is interesting. We say, here are the 4 or 5 players that we think are relevant. We have to meet them all very, very, very quickly and decide which one is the best team and which one we think is going to out-execute everybody else. And that's the one we're going to want to make the bet on.
Yeah.
But it's because we can only make one. We're not going to make conflicting investments. And the team and the ability to iterate and kind of stay ahead and always be a step ahead on thinking that is incredibly important. And that's really, even in the age of SaaS, before AI was there, that's kind of what distinguished the best SaaS companies. So why would it change now? It just has a new ingredient technology that makes it even cooler and makes for a lot more competitors. And so you have to sort of find your way and sort of, I guess, fight for your right to add value. And that to us, again, it goes back to team and density and some of these things, but certainly that's our best way to assess an AI company today. But again, these valuations don't make it easy because really got to be right. And I think less about the valuation now or even the valuation a year from now. Never mistake valuation with terminal value. It only matters of what rents this business has a right to extract from their given market or industry. It just goes back to that. The companies that don't make it, sometimes, yes, if you didn't have the talent density, you didn't have the team or that limits the outcome. But the range of possible outcomes for any given business is dictated by the market and your ability to do the Gretzky, where the puck is going on a market, and really thinking creatively of where the ceiling could really be in that market. And hopefully you pick the right team to go capitalize on it. Because if those things are true, the ones that are not great outcomes is because you misjudged. Hopefully, if you had the right team, the best team, you might have misjudged the market. Yeah. And so now it's easy to overvalue a market. So you have to think really, really, really clearly a lot about sort of the ceiling and kind of the ability to, that's all about extracting rents. And then hopefully you bet on the right team to do it. But that exercise is really hard because this is sort of completely new and you have to think creatively. It's sort of when we did Uber similarly, right? You can think of just taxis, you can think of black cars, you can think of taxis, or you can think of getting from point A to point B at certain distance. And then that changes the view. It's easy in hindsight, but that's a little bit of what people are having to do.
I mean, I think that Gretzky analogy, is accurate, but really, really hard at the pace that this is evolving, right? Like I know that we haven't seen a technology
less than 2 years old.
This pace. Yeah. I mean, the ChatGPT released November 2022. Look at where that is now. Like, I think as a note for your investment, I did this week become an Anthropic Pro subscriber. So added that to my my AI arsenal. But I look at a company like Perplexity, right? And amazing. Perplexity has, for those of you that aren't familiar with Perplexity, become familiar with them and use them. They've replaced Google for me and many other people. It's a very powerful AI search engine, essentially, that you can connect to whatever LLM on the back end you want. And it gives you really well-researched results with citations. And it's incredible. And I think about, we had almost a decade of Google became a verb, right? Like if your online search, whatever, even if you're not using Google, you're probably still saying that you're Googling something. Right?
Google it in Perplexity,
it's like the Kleenex to tissue analogy. But the pace at which now I 90% of my searches are first on Perplexity, right? There are very few things where I'm I'm going to Google this. I'm just going to go. And that shift in behavior over such a short period of time is, I think, analogous to just the pace at which this is evolving, which I think puts all the pressure again on you and your contemporaries around what are these bets? And I'd love to kind of, Perplexity, obviously a personal tool, something that I use, but how do you use generative AI? What tools do you use? What use cases? Are there particular things where, because I was at a session at actually Noetic, another one of your investments, they had an event called Elevate, and they had a keynote speaker there, and they talked about 10x employees, right? And the ability to kind of borrow that Scott Galloway quote, AI won't take your jobs, human using AI will. And the idea that if you can become really well-versed to how to use these tools, it can 10x your impact as an individual, right? As an employee. And I'd love to just get your perspective. How do these kind of tools factor into your day-to-day? What are some of the use cases that you use them for?
I don't use them enough because every time I try something new, it's amazing. A lot of my job is interacting with founders, and so luckily, no AI in between us in a way. But certainly, we were big users of both Claude and Sana Learning, but also Sana AI, their kind of enterprise assistant, their knowledge management tool. You have to people have to be patient enough to iterate a lot with tools to really understand how they can fit in and form habits, because old habits are really hard to break, really hard. And so, I mean, I still search Google the old way, keyword-ish. Like I don't ask long form questions of it, even though I should. But it's just old habits, right? I mean, I grew up, we didn't have the internet in Argentina where I grew up until the very, very end. And so I never really had it in my high school years. And so only at the very end. And so I just searched that way. And then keyword was much easier searching back then because the internet speeds were really slow. And so I just had I just needed something, an answer, anything would work. And so I think old habits are hard to break, but I think you got to iterate a lot. For me, there are moments though, when you have to pay attention. It's about iterating, but also pay attention when it does something that is unique and understand how. And then you can start imagining. That's where the efficient frontier moves, right? Of what you can do. I did it for my wife the other day. She had to do something in the PTO at our local school. And I said, well, why don't you just use ChatGPT or Claude or one of these players? And so she got into Claude, she did it, and she was amazed. And I go, I've been investing in AI for more than 2 years now. Like, how did you not know to do this? And she lives with me. And she said, I just didn't think, I got a lot going on. I just didn't think about it yet, right? It's just not part of the workflow. But I do think people in corporate settings it's good that people are mandating AI from the top even, because then people are forced to do it, forced to iterate. It happened to me once. There are moments, and I'll give you a vignette just to sort of show you maybe one of those moments when it enlightened me. So it does revolve around Sana's AI product. So Sana had indexed a bunch of stuff in Google Drive and a bunch of places. There was a transcript which they had from a call I had with that I used their meeting recorder for with our marketing partner, Tiffany. She recorded a conversation with me about a bunch of different topics that I wanted to talk about or write about, but didn't have time. And so she said, let's just get it all out. So we did it, and I put it in there, and it kind of collected collected e-dust in the Google Drive. And then I was trying to write a LinkedIn post about something, and I need a little bit of inspiration. I said, hey, I'm running around. I'm on my phone. I just want to do this really quick. So I got into Sana and I said, hey, write a LinkedIn post as a VC about this. This is a topic. Here are some bullets of things I want to emphasize. And then it had one bullet that I said, wow, that almost sounded like me. Yeah. And it had a footnote. And the footnote was the transcript from a month before. It detected that was similar, and it brought it together. And so that's when I said, okay, hold on a second. There's one thing to just say it's great at generating something when I prompt it one shot really well or 2 or 3 shot right in a chat window. It's another to say I've indexed you, or I understand you better, or I understand context between all that you fed me a bunch of this information, and I can put 2 and 2 together. Because I would have done that if I would have remembered that the transcript that was collecting e-dust had something in there that was like that. And so that was the moment to me that it was one of those it's alive moments. And I said, okay, I can see the first order, kind of first, second gear maybe of AI. That's when I realized if you spend the time to iterate and you give it something, it's going to give a lot back to you. And so again, there's all these little things now that I do because I know it's got all this information on me and index me in so many ways. I can get more aggressive in the things I ask it, right? I can get more demanding of it in a way. And so again, I don't use it enough, but again, it's not a huge part of my job, but I do think now as an operator, I can't get that out of my head. And so I think a lot about a lot of our workflows and how they can be automated, or how we can make things easier for all our people, other partners, our principals, our associates, our investors to do their jobs quicker, to really unlock the more creative parts of their brain and less the rote stuff. And there's much more than you even can think of. You just got to put in the time. It's not just going to happen. It's not like the magic is the first gear, but you got to know how to pull the clutch and go to second gear, third gear. You really got to work your way through it because it's got so many more gears we don't even think of, let alone the agentic stuff. Let's just put that aside because it's early and it's still coming up now. But that'll be a whole other level.
That'll be the next wave. We're going to have to get together for a part 2 episode because that's going to change everything, and we'll just leave that as a teaser of what's to come. But hearing your analogy, I was recording a podcast earlier this year with Guy Kawasaki, and he created a custom GPT where, like, obviously he's been creating content and writing books and for decades, and he ran it all, created a custom GPT, trained it on all of his information, his writings, his voice, his talks, all of it, and created Kawasaki GPT. And he then, he was using that initially as a tool for himself. So if he was being asked to like, hey, what's your perspective on X? Or could you give a quote on this topic or whatever it might be? He was like, I'll take a first pass and use that, and then I'll probably refine it. I saw actually on Threads this week that he now open sourced that. It released that. So he's allowing other people to interact with Kawasaki GPT, and it's fascinating. And so you're right. It's like you train these things on this whole digital footprint that you have, and it's amazing the power of what you see coming from that. JP, I'll leave you with one question, because I think there's probably a lot of people who are, watching or listening, and they maybe fit that category we talked about earlier of somebody who's maybe moving from the operator side to the founder side. Maybe they have an idea, maybe they're pre-seed, maybe they're at the seed stage. But you've obviously worked with a lot of different founders at different stages. If there's one piece of advice that you would want to give founders who are going to raise, so first-time founders going and beginning to speak to venture capital firms about their first raise, what would you want them to know?
There's a hidden assumption in that question, which is they should be going to venture capital. It's not very self-serving, but not every business is a venture backable business.
Yeah.
And people talk venture scale business, but that we need to sort of break that up. What does that mean? It means getting to very large revenue levels, call it 50, 100, 200, 300 million of ARR, and still growing fast. It's not like eking over the bar. It's getting there and getting there with velocity, with higher than average velocity. So venture scale, it's really kind of venture path, venture scale plus growth, right? Even at large scale, there just aren't many markets that you can do that with. And so you're trying to think as a founder, should I go after that capital? Because it is a very distinct ride. It is a very distinct set of expectations. And people equated it to, they're the people that fund me with just a PowerPoint. That's not just venture capital. And I'm not saying don't go for it, but be very clear about every round. There's usually like an angel, friends and family, or angel round, or pre-seed. I don't even know what that means anymore, but there's pre-seed rounds. I guess it's a small seed, but whatever. There's other rounds that you raise before you sort of double, triple, quadruple down on the venture path. And I think founders have to be very wide-eyed about it, eyes wide open, ears listen, open ears, always be listening to the market. With market's going to tell you everything you need to know about what kind of business you are, and also of yourself, right? Are you ready for this? Are you made for this? And so I always say, the one thing you can't change is the market. You will not change it. It has certain demand patterns. It has certain dynamics that exist. Certain things are changing in that market that allow you an opportunity to build a product that they want. Be it consumer, be it, I focus more on enterprise software, so maybe this is a little bit tainted by that. But there has to be something, some dislocation or some change that is causing a small initially, the innovators, bigger eventually, early adopters, and even bigger later, early majority, right? The chasm, or crossing the chasm, that it's becoming a P0 problem, a right now problem I need to solve. Very few markets actually unlock demand like that continuously in big chunks of the market in compressed timeframes. That's venture, the compressed timeframe. You could be right about a business from point A to point B, and that's you have to think much longer term. We're in these businesses for 10 plus years. You got to really think long term about them. And you could be right, but if you're wrong about the slope, it's not a venture business. And so sometimes you realize that once you hit kind of the proverbial ARR wall around 15, 20 million of ARR, then you realize I might not be in a venture business or a venture market, or maybe I didn't execute well. That could be it, right too. But let's assume you're the right team, all the talent density, right market. It's an interesting market. You're right about the long-term thesis and everything, but demand is just not there to go capture. People talk about demand gen. It's really demand capture. The demand, you ain't generating it. The market conditions, their priorities are generating it. You're grabbing it. And so the best businesses are ones that seemingly it's a market that didn't exist or it's really small. And eventually you dominate that little thing. And that little thing just grows so fast that you ride with it. E-commerce, Shopify, boom. Transportation, Uber, small, boom. There's so much more money spent on transportation now because it exists. So those are very unique, but those are the best ones. But I would tell you that start with your market. So usually people go this way. I want to raise venture. Okay, they start cap table. I want venture capitalists. Okay, because I want venture capitalists, I have to show this big hockey stick growth plan. Here it is. Here's the growth plan, and here's some very, very large TAM, amorphous TAM. Okay, great. Check, right? And then they go and say, okay, I'm gonna sort of back up that growth plan with this TAM and this market and why A and B is right over the long term. Okay, that's wonderful. If you don't answer why now, or you don't answer why significant amounts of demand are going to be in compressed timeframes, you're never going to shoot up that hockey stick. But they started with cap table. If we just flip this and say, I have to be a student of my market, i.e. customers. If I'm a student of that market and I really understand, like, why is this now causing it has to be almost violent dislocation that causes their priorities or causes, again, different parts of the market at different times, but sort of a cascading effect of it's really important for a lot of people, or this market is really being created for some reason, in the case of like Shopify e-commerce, then you'd say, well, start with that. And that supports a realistic growth plan that looks like this. And then that tells me the cap table I need, because sometimes you're in a seed or you're in a series A and you're about by a series B and you're still questioning if it's a venture scale market. It's not. Or you've not executed. And so once you really are honest with yourself about the growth plan in a sustainable way, anybody can spend $6 million a month to grow, 200K of ARR. That's not sustainable. Or even, $10 million a quarter to add, I don't know, it's $5 million of ARR or less. That's fine, but it's not sustainable. And so again, the market you don't control it. It doesn't change. Then you go to realistic growth plan and then figure out what your cap table needs to look like. So that to me is very important for founders to do, because by the way, you're going to have a much more nuanced thesis of this market. Why now? If you start there, forget the other stuff is going to take care of itself. But if you start there and you're a student of that, no better way to keep your pulse on it and evolve with your market too over time.
Yeah. Well, Jay, I appreciate the thoroughness and depth of that answer. And hopefully there's a lot of listeners who are taking notes and will probably rewind this and hit it a second time, because I think there's some really important lessons. I appreciate your time. It was great jamming with you on this podcast. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your perspective on the space. And I think we're going to have to get together on the agentic AI level in probably a couple months.
We'll see. That's months, moving that fast. Yeah, it's moving fast. Lars, thanks a lot for having me, my friend. And thanks for all that you do for the community. It's great.
All right, JP, take care.
All right, see ya.